The cables tangled at my feet like a nest of indecision. The modem blinking steadily as I tightened the last connection. Another fix, another quiet victory. I crouched in the corner of our home office. Vivian's awards crowding the walls, her degrees framed and spotlighted like curated museum pieces. Mine. A dusty shelf held my prototype router and the faded sketchbook where Signal Corps began. No fanfare, no accolades, just me and my belief in what I built. Vivian used to say, I had vision. But it was the kind of compliment you give a child with finger paint. Safe, distant, and utterly without faith. She never said it in front of her friends, never in public. Out there, she held me like a handbag, something functional, acceptable, but never worth discussing at length. I'd grown used to it, not numb, but practiced. Her father, Franklin, had never hidden his disdain. He wore it like his cufflinks, polished, deliberate. Quinn, you're wasting your life on that experiment, he'd say. Like Signal Corps was a childish science project, not a network optimization tool quietly powering 4 major e-commerce platforms. I didn't correct him. I learned early that explaining value to someone invested in your failure was an exercise in futility. Vivian adored him. Her world orbited his approval, and she worked damn hard to earn it. Ivy League graduate, finance awards, features, and tech executives to watch. And every single time she was praised, I clapped the loudest because I loved her. Even when she smirked at dinner parties after I shared a development breakthrough, calling it cute, I swallowed the bitterness. I told myself it was just her way of coping with pressure. Even when she introduced me as the guy with all the ideas, but none of the luck, I let it slide because I believed in us. And more importantly, I believed in what I was building. Signal Corps wasn't just another hopeful app or gimmick. It was a silent backbone, an invisible accelerator hiding beneath bloated systems and inefficient code. I designed it to be the skeleton no one saw but everyone relied on. I modeled it after myself in a way quiet, essential, overlooked. Most nights, while Vivian reviewed acquisition deals or prepared pitch decks in her curated glass office, I worked in the garage. My hands cramping from the soldering iron, my eyes blurring after hours of testing compression ratios and latency thresholds. My version of romance was debugging during thunderstorm surges so our beta clients wouldn't drop signal in a power flicker. I didn't expect applause, but I hoped for respect. We used to talk more back when she still wore flannel to bed and stole fries from my plate before the heels got higher and the titles grew longer and our marriage became a branding exercise. I remember one night she stood in the kitchen, hair tied back, holding a wine glass she hadn't sipped. You could be huge, you know, she said quietly. If you just had a real business partner, someone to polish the edges. I laughed then, more amused than hurt. You mean someone who wears better suits and doesn't have shoulder burns? She smiled, but didn't deny it. That was months ago. Lately, her compliments had turned into calculations. How scalable is it? What's the burn rate? What's the long-term exit strategy? As if I were a pitch deck, she was forced to skim. I answered, not to impress her, but to remind myself I had answers. And yet, even with the silence, even with the quiet dismissals, I held on because love, real love, isn't loud. It's not flashbulbs or Instagram-worthy moments. It's staying, believing, pouring coffee at 2 a.m. because she has a call with Singapore, or rewiring the breaker because she tripped it running 6 monitors at once. Still, I'd be lying if I said the cracks weren't spreading. One night, I overheard her on the phone. He's supportive, but not ambitious, you know? Like, he's fine being average. I think he likes being invisible. Her voice was hushed, but not enough. I sat in the dark hallway, gripping a box of Ethernet cables, staring at the closed door. Invisible. The word burned more than I wanted to admit. I didn't confront her. What was there to say? She wasn't wrong. I had been invisible. I let her cast the light, thinking it was love, thinking that my silence was strength. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. I looked at Signal Corps' server logs that night with new eyes. The metrics weren't average. We'd cut data delivery lag by 28% across 3 test markets. Our tech had survived 4 DDoS attacks without a single drop. One of our anonymized modules had been quietly integrated into a health records platform used by 2 major hospital networks. And nobody knew because I hadn't told them, because I played small, because I let their spotlight blind me into thinking my shadows meant nothing. Not anymore. That night I stayed up until dawn, mapping out a new structure. Shell companies, licensing strategies, a stealth network of clients. I started using a pseudonym QM lock for all new partnerships. The name sounded like someone who didn't wait to be introduced. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't care if Vivian noticed, because whether she saw me or not, I had decided to be undeniable. And shadows, after all, only exist when something's standing in the light. The valet barely acknowledged me when I pulled up in the black Honda Civic. I caught the brief flick of his eyes toward the Bentley in front of me, then back to me like I was a mistake in the parking lot. I handed over the keys anyway, straightened my tie, her favorite blue one, and walked toward the Strapment rooftop where the party lights pulsed against the skyline like a heartbeat made of glass and steel. It was Vivian's big night. Senior partner, tech acquisition lead. A title so heavy with prestige, it practically bent gravity. I should have felt proud. I should have felt included. Instead, I moved through that rooftop like a ghost walking through a world that didn't see him anymore. The air smelled like money. Imported champagne, dry-aged sliders, perfume brands I couldn't pronounce. Her firm had spared no expense. Gold flutes, live string quartet, rooftop heaters glowing like little artificial suns. It was the kind of party meant to whisper, "You've arrived," into every camera lens. I adjusted my sleeves, took a breath, and walked in. She saw me across the space, but didn't come. She smiled that small, camera-ready smile and gave me a nod. Polite, distant, like I was the barista who remembered her order, but nothing more. I tried to tell myself it was because she was working the room, strategizing, networking. But then the introductions began. Vivian floated from circle to circle, her voice charming and confident. "This is Javier from London. He manages our AI analytics team. A kiss on the cheek. This is Priya, our wizard in fintech deals. A gentle hand on the arm. Oh, and this," she turned slightly, the way she always did before the lie. "This is, well, you must already know Nathan. He's the one who brought us that German cyber defense acquisition." Laughter, applause. I wasn't introduced, not once. Even when I stood directly beside her as she greeted an incoming executive from Zurich. "This is my," she paused, barely glancing at me before redirecting. "Sorry. Give me 1 second. I just need to check on the bar setup." She brushed past me like wind. I watched her gold heels disappear behind a waiter balancing a tray of shrimp ceviche. I moved to the edge of the rooftop, letting my fingers wrap around a glass of something expensive and tasteless. From that vantage point, I could see the whole city. Its glittering chaos, its indifferent sprawl. I used to dream of moments like this. A room full of polished people, clinking glasses over shared ambition, nodding at me like I belonged. But in this crowd, I was invisible. I checked my phone. No messages. I opened the Signal Corps dashboard out of habit. Live systems looked good. Ping rates optimal. 2 new requests had come in through Treno Systems, our anonymous defense front. I closed it. I wasn't here to work tonight. I was here to support my wife. When she finally returned to my side, it wasn't to acknowledge me. It was to refill her drink. She leaned in and whispered, "You should smile more. People are noticing." I blinked. "Noticing what?" "That you're sulking," she said, already turning. "This is a celebration. Don't ruin it." I smiled. I smiled like I had rehearsed it in a mirror 100 times. I nodded and sipped my drink. I watched the way she laughed with Franklin, her father, who stood by the corner fireplace like he owned this guy itself. He spotted me and raised his glass barely. A gesture so small it might have been accidental. I didn't return it. Then came the toast. It started with clinking glasses. A soft chime spreading through the rooftop as servers passed around fresh champagne. I saw her step onto the small riser they'd set up near the ivy-covered wall, her golden dress catching the light. She looked radiant, powerful, unstoppable. She cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming tonight. This moment means everything to me. I've dreamed of leading a division like this since my early days in finance. And to stand here tonight as Strapman Capital's newest senior partner and tech acquisition lead, it's overwhelming." Polite applause, smiles, camera flashes. "I want to thank my team," she continued, scanning the crowd like she was painting it with validation. "Javier, Priya, Nathan, you are the heart of this machine. My father, Franklin, you've always believed in me." Another pause. And finally, she turned toward me. "I want to thank my biggest challenge. My husband, Quinn, has turned. You've shown me exactly what not to do in business." Laughter. Actual laughter. It started in pockets, then rippled outward, slow and cruel. She didn't flinch, which is why I'm thrilled to announce she held her glass higher. That Strapman Capital is acquiring Signal Core and folding it into our firm under a new leadership structure. My breath stopped. I froze in place, not because of the words, but because of the timing. With real leadership at the helm, she added more laughter, even louder this time. Franklin smirked, nodding like he'd just closed the deal of the year. My mouth went dry. My hands felt disconnected from my arms. I didn't say a word. I didn't storm out. I didn't throw the glass or shout or demand the microphone. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the truth. She had rehearsed this. Maybe for days. Maybe with Franklin's help. Maybe this whole party was never about her promotion. It was about my erasure. I set my glass down on the edge of the table. It wobbled for a second, but didn't fall. Then I smiled. The same kind of smile I used to give her when we were poor and hopeful, when we dreamed of changing the world together. But this smile had weight purpose. I turned and walked off the rooftop. No one followed me. No one called my name. I was just a silhouette slipping between bodies and balloons, laughter still ringing in my ears like gunshots in an empty room. By the time I reached the parking lot, the valet had already brought my car around, probably hoping for a tip. I handed him $5 without looking up, climbed into the Civic, and pulled away from the tower of glass where she stood on a fake stage in front of borrowed power. Let her toast. Let them laugh. I had code to write, a system to protect, and a name no one saw coming. The sound of laughter stuck to me like wet paint. I could still hear it as I drove home. Each mocking chuckle and echo in my head, bouncing off everything I thought we'd built. The lights of the city blurred through the windshield, but I wasn't crying. I wasn't even angry yet. I was empty, like someone had pulled the plug and let everything drain out of me all at once. Vivian's voice played on loop. "My biggest challenge, my husband Quinn, you've shown me exactly what not to do in business." And then, like a dagger twisted for sport, which is why I'm thrilled to announce we're acquiring Signal Corps and folding it into our firm with real leadership at the helm. I had been publicly executed without a bullet. Just a smile, just a toast. I parked 2 blocks from our house. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to wake the neighbors with the sound of the garage door. Maybe I just needed to feel the cold bite of night air in my lungs. I walked slowly, every step syncing with the memory of someone's laughter. I think it was Franklin's. That short, satisfied huff of amusement he used to give when I dared to share ideas at dinner. He never believed in me, and now he'd helped orchestrate my fall. I unlocked the front door as quietly as I could. The house was dark, which meant she wasn't home yet. She'd still be basking in applause, sipping champagne, probably telling some hedge fund manager how gracious I'd been about the acquisition. I stepped into the kitchen and stood in the silence, the hum of the fridge. The only sound, low and even like a lifeline. I didn't flip the light on. I didn't need to see the pictures on the wall or the neatly stacked awards on the shelf to remember what this place had become, hers. I sat at the kitchen table, pulled my laptop from my bag, and opened Signal Corps' dashboard. Everything was green, stable, active, productive. Our clients, real clients, were still using our core systems. If they'd felt even a tremor in performance, we would have heard about it in minutes. But they didn't because nothing had failed except the illusion that I was small. Vivian thought Signal Corps was weak because I never paraded our wins. I kept our biggest contracts private behind layers of NDAs and protective shells. What she never knew, what no one in her smug circle of asset managers and acquisition vultures knew, was that Signal Corps had been restructured under a different parent name, Trent Systems. That little experiment she thought she could fold into her firm, it didn't belong to me anymore. Not on paper. I'd sold controlling interest to a silent board composed of 3 longtime friends, tech veterans, and angel investors who believed in what we were building. I kept my position as founder and chief architect, but the shares were split. The real value was hidden where no acquisition team would think to look. She didn't know that one of our modules had just gone live within Strapman's infrastructure 6 weeks ago under a license agreement brokered by Trentel, not Signalor. She didn't know that her firm had already signed a 5-year license for our security framework, which meant any attempt to absorb us would violate contract law and trigger default penalties her firm wasn't prepared for. She didn't know because she never asked. But tonight changed things. She hadn't just embarrassed me. She declared war. I sat there bathed in the soft blue light of the laptop screen and started writing. Not code, not emails, a plan, a map, a step-by-step breakdown of exactly how to respond without ever raising my voice. First, a press release, not a direct rebuttal. No, that would look emotional, reactive. No, this would be a quiet unveiling of Trent Systems' new partnership with the Department of Defense. Just a small blurb on tech sites tomorrow morning, noting that we've been awarded a development contract for encrypted civilian military communications infrastructure. Enough to catch attention, enough to make Strapman's legal team freeze. Then a timed update to our investor dashboard, reflecting our most recent valuation, $180 million, audited, verified, and recorded. Far beyond what Vivian or Franklin had ever imagined. I kept it quiet on purpose. Let the world think we were struggling. That way, they wouldn't see the pivot coming. I drafted a second document, an internal letter to Trent's board suggesting we send a formal cease and desist notice to Strapman Capital if they referenced any integration of Signal Corps without formal negotiation. I didn't hit send. Not yet. I just wanted to know it was ready. By the time I heard the front door open, The plan was already outlined. My coffee had gone cold, and the first hints of dawn were threatening the edges of the windows. Vivian came in humming, the click of her heels sharp against the wood floors. I didn't turn. I didn't need to see her face. "Oh," she said casually when she saw me. "You're up." I didn't respond. She walked to the fridge, pulled out a bottle of water, and leaned against the counter like nothing had happened. "It was a good night," she said. "Everyone loved the toast, everyone except the person it was about," I said quietly. She sipped. "Oh, come on. You know how these things go. It's just optics." I turned to face her, then slowly, calmly. "You called me a liability." She rolled her eyes. "It was a joke. Lighten up. You announced the acquisition of a company you don't own." "I will own it," she said, setting the bottle down. Her tone clipped. "Now, our team already filed the paperwork. Strapman will handle everything. You'll get paid. I don't need your buyout." I said Signal Corps isn't for sale. She laughed. Actually laughed. "Quinn, you're adorable. You don't have a say anymore. You signed the IP over to the company, right? And if you didn't, well, your name's still on everything. It'll come back to you in court. We've got a legal team that wins for sport." I smiled. Not because I was happy, because this was the moment I realized she truly didn't know. "I don't own the IP anymore," I said. "It's under Trent Systems." She blinked. Signal Corps is a shell now. The real product, the modules, the platform, the architecture, it's housed elsewhere and it's protected. Her smile faltered. "And as of tomorrow, Trento will be publicly announcing our defense contract. So if Strapman even breathes the word acquisition again, you'll be hit with national security violations and contract breaches. Your firm's lawyers will be too busy explaining themselves to the Pentagon to worry about me." She stared at me, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I saw something crack. Not fury, not arrogance, fear. "You're bluffing." I stood, picked up my laptop, walked past her. "You called me a dropout, a joke. You used my name as a punchline in your big moment. But what you didn't realize," I said as I stopped at the stairs, "is that while you were celebrating your climb, I was building the mountain beneath you." I didn't wait for her reply. I went upstairs and closed the door behind me. She'd thrown the first stone, thinking I wouldn't throw back. She was wrong. The house was silent by the time I returned to my desk. The faint creak of floorboards above me told me Vivian had finally gone to bed, probably after downing 2 glasses of wine and staring at the wall. She didn't try to stop me when I walked away earlier. Didn't follow. And that silence, it was a new kind of victory. Not loud, not explosive, just quiet confirmation that I'd finally stepped out of her spotlight and into my own. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because I had too much to do. When your enemy believes they've already won, that's the best time to finalize your endgame. And I had no intention of letting her strike twice. I opened 3 windows on my screen. Signal Corrore's back-end, Tintel's legal directory, and the secure message portal we used with the Department of Defense. Every keystroke was deliberate, each tab a piece of armor being SEC. Vivian thought she had pulled off a corporate coup that by announcing the acquisition of Signal Corps during her toast, she'd created a momentum that couldn't be reversed. But what she didn't know, what no one in that perfectly lit rooftop crowd knew, was that Signal Corps was no longer the Corps. It was a skin, a decoy, a name built to be underestimated. The real operations had shifted months ago into a restructured and renamed entity, Trent Systems. back when I realized that she was more interested in folding me into her corporate ascent than building with me. I started taking steps to protect what mattered. I'd brought in two of my most trusted contacts. David Ling, a cybersecurity sont who'd once ran encryption for a major telecommunications firm, and Kira Maddox, an IP attorney whose last 3 cases ended in corporate settlements totaling over $70 million. We met under the guise of a garage startup refresh. What we actually did was engineer an invisible migration. Bit by bit, every part of Signal Core, its code, its assets, its infrastructure was relocated and secured under Trento. The licenses renegotiated, the server locations obscured, ownership reassigned to a trust managed by Kira's firm, and Vivian had no clue. I logged into Trent's client portal and reviewed the recent activity. The Department of Defense had finalized their onboarding checklist. Encryption testing was scheduled for Friday. A second module for remote infrastructure reinforcement was flagged as high priority by another client, a Fortune 100 energy firm that had quietly contracted us through a third-party vendor. Trent's reach was growing, and the most powerful part. It looked like a whisper on paper, just another supplier in a sea of invisible architects. I opened the embargoed press release, the one I'd prepared weeks ago, in case Vivian or someone like her tried to make a move. The headline read, "Trintel Systems secures defense contract for civilian encryption infrastructure sites breakthrough in low-latency security transmission." Beneath that, the draft contained a brief but potent paragraph. The company, co-founded by technologist Quinn Locke, has maintained a low-profile presence while pioneering encryption frameworks currently deployed across finance, healthcare, and defense. No boasting, just facts. Enough to make Strapman Capital pause. Enough to make any firm that considered an acquisition think twice. I scheduled the release for 10:05 a.m. Eastern. Not too early, just enough time for Strapman's team to begin their morning with coffee and a heart attack. After locking the release, I turned to the acquisition terms. Not the ones Vivian smugly slid across the table in that rooftop joke of a deal. No, these were real terms drafted by me. Only this time, they weren't for Signal Core. They were for Strapman's cybersecurity assets. Through a shell company, I had quietly bought up several key patents their division had failed to renew on time. Oversights from a team too busy with champagne to notice what was slipping through their fingers. Those patents now held by Trent. That gave us legal leverage to pursue acquisition of the entire portfolio if we wanted. And I sent a message to Kira. "All systems prepped, we're ready." She replied in under a minute. "They'll panic. Don't blink." I didn't plan to. By 4:30 a.m., I was running simulations through our internal load test. I watched as virtual users pushed every corner of the infrastructure, looking for cracks. None appeared. The systems held. Resilient, secure. More than I could say for the house I lived in, where the woman upstairs had planned my professional funeral behind a clink of glass and polite applause. The bitterness tried to creep in, but I wouldn't let it. Not now. Not after everything. I didn't need revenge. I needed precision. Control. The kind of control that only comes when you stop trying to explain yourself and start letting your results do the talking. I stood, stretched, and walked to the kitchen. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee. Vivian liked hers strong with almond milk. I took it black. Always had. I set her mug down on the counter just as I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She came down in her silk robe, moving like nothing had happened. Her face was composed, calm, like she convinced herself that last night was just branding strategy, not betrayal. She looked at the mug, then at me. "You didn't sleep?" "No," I replied, sipping my coffee. "Had some things to take care of." She had me cautiously, sensing something off. but not able to place it yet. I figured we'd talk this morning about the merger. There won't be a merger, I said plainly. Her smile tightened. Quinn, be reasonable. Reason left the room the second you used me as a punchline, I said, walking past her. You wanted the world to laugh at me. You didn't think I'd already prepared a statement of my own. She turned to follow me, her eyes flashing. What are you talking about? I pulled up the scheduled release on my phone, tilted it toward her. This goes live in 5 hours. Trent Systems Defense Contract Public Exposure. The whole world will see what you tried to absorb without understanding. She read the headline, then again slower. Her face shifted, anger, confusion, then dawning realization. Trenil is yours. Trent is mine, I said. And so is everything that powers your division. Without my license renewals, Strapman can't legally deploy half the tools it uses in client networks. Her mouth parted, but no sound came. I told you once, I continued, voice low and steady, that you can't build empires on people you don't respect. You didn't listen. You built yours on the idea that I was forgettable, that I wouldn't fight back. She gripped the counter. You're going to ruin me. No, I said, you ruined yourself. I just stopped protecting the lie. The clock on the wall ticked past 5:12 a.m. The sky outside began to pale at the edges. A new day forming, a different one. One where I wasn't the man behind the scenes anymore. One where I no longer watched her from the shadows, waiting for a scrap of recognition. I walked back to my desk and closed my laptop. My work was done for now. Upstairs, she was still standing by the coffee, silent, finally seeing the difference between the man she mocked and the man she underestimated. And while she slept off the last of her delusion, I had already built the firewall that would keep her world out of mine forever. The next morning began like a performance. At precisely 9:01 a.m., the glass doors of the private office suite slid open with a hiss, and Vivian walked in as if she'd rehearsed the entrance. The heels, those red bottom ones she wore for big deals, clicked sharply against the marble floor. Her charcoal gray deal dress hugged her frame in all the right ways, and her eyes sparkled with the sheen of confidence that came from believing the world still bent in her favor. Behind her was Franklin, postured like a war general inspecting enemy territory, flanked by 2 attorneys I recognized from Strapman's litigation department. None of them smiled. Morning, she said sweetly, sliding a crisp, leather-bound folder across the conference table. You're going to love this deal, Quinn, I promise. I didn't reach for the folder. Instead, I tapped a key on my laptop, bringing the large wall monitor to life. The screen lit up with my desktop, orderly, deliberate, waiting. I looked up at her, and then at Franklin, who gave me a nod that was more dismissal than greeting. They thought I was cornered. They thought this was just a formality. They'd show up, serve me their acquisition proposal, and walk out with my life's work. And maybe even my signature on a severance agreement if they were generous. I could practically feel the smugness radiating off them. Vivian leaned forward like she was about to sell me a dream. The terms are generous. Full absorption of Signal Corps and Distractment's tech division. You'll walk away with a cash payout, vested equity, and a year of advisory consultation. Think of it like getting paid to do less. Franklin added, You're lucky we're offering anything after what you pulled with that press release. Spooked a few board members. I tilted my head. It wasn't meant to spook. It was meant to inform. Franklin snorted. Don't play coy. That announcement was calculated. You blindsided us. No, I said, finally sitting back. I protected what was mine. Vivian's eyes narrowed just slightly. I could tell she hadn't expected calm from me. Rage, maybe defensiveness, but not this. I nodded at the monitor. Let me show you something. Slide 1. Signal Corrore's current valuation. 180 million verified by 2 independent audits and supported by recent infrastructure license sales. I watch Franklin's brow tighten. Slide 2, the client list. Not names, of course. We protect those, but the logos of their parent companies told the story. 3 Fortune 100s, 2 in Europe, 1 stateside. I let them read. Let the silence stretch. Then, slide 3. The Trental defense contract signed, sealed, classified. But the contract ID and the government seal were visible enough to show I wasn't bluffing. I turned the laptop slightly, revealing a browser tab open to Strapman's internal infrastructure audit log. Your firm's been using our architecture for nearly 10 months, I said. Encrypted packet acceleration, firewall load balancing, and predictive routing. You signed the license through a third-party vendor. Our tech already runs behind your systems. Vivian's mouth parted just slightly. Franklin leaned forward. You're bluffing. I clicked a file. An email chained from Strapman's internal IT director, confirming the integration last November. Am I? He stared at the screen like he was reading the terms of his own defeat. See? I continued. Signal Corps wasn't failing. It was hiding. And you just tried to buy something that your firm is already renting at a premium. One of the lawyers finally spoke. Even if that's true, it doesn't protect you from strategic acquisition. You're still vulnerable under standard merger clauses. I'm not merging, I interrupted, voice calm. I'm not for sale. But your division might be. Vivian laughed, a short, breathless laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Excuse me. Slide 4 appeared. Trental's acquisition proposal. Not for Strapman itself, but for its cybersecurity portfolio. The language was sharp and the numbers were precise. Your firm lost 3 patents last quarter. We acquired them. We own the rights to Strapman's compression cipher algorithm, the idle data diagnostic protocol, and the failure redundancy matrix you're still marketing as proprietary. We sent a courtesy notice this morning. Your legal team will get it in an hour. Franklin sat back, stunned. The lawyers looked at each other, visibly uncomfortable now. Vivian's face changed. That practiced mask began to crack, and for a split second I saw her reach for the old strategy charm. Quinn, she said, softening her voice. This doesn't have to be ugly. We're partners. We can find a middle ground here. I smiled faintly. I'm sure we could have before the rooftop stunt. She flinched, the memory like a slap. This isn't revenge, Vivian. I said, this is correction. You made me the lesson. Now you're living it. Franklin stood up, jaw clenched. This is war, Quinn. No, I replied calmly, rising to my feet. This is business. You're just not used to losing. He stormed out. One lawyer followed. The other stayed behind for a second too long, probably weighing job security versus ethics, then turned and left as well. Vivian stood, but slowly. Her fingers touched the edge of the table like it was the only solid thing left in the room. You played me, she whispered. No, I said, gathering my laptop. You ignored me. There's a difference. She took one last breath, trying to summon her composure, but it didn't come. She walked out without another word, and I stood there, the only sound in the room, the gentle hum of the monitor still displaying my final slide. Some threats aren't visible until it's too late. The room felt like a hell breath as I advanced the next slide. It glowed across the screen in stark contrast to the mahogany-paneled walls and chrome accents of the boardroom, casting pale light across the confused and increasingly pale faces staring back at me. There were 7 of them now, Vivian Franklin, the two lawyers, and three of Strapman's top-level executives who had arrived 15 minutes late and expected a smooth negotiation, not a coup. Slide 1 had already shattered the room's illusion. Signal Korori's valuation was far beyond what they had assumed. Slide 2 had chipped away at their composure with proof of our Heil client base. Slide 3 had introduced the contract with the Department of Defense. Now Slide 4 would bury them under the weight of what they never thought to question. I clicked again. The screen displayed a countdown timer. 47 minutes and 18 seconds. That's the time left until a scheduled press release goes live across national tech and business media outlets. I said, my voice level. It outlines Trent Systems' acquisition of 3 patents previously owned and now expired by Strapman Capital. It also highlights our recent federal defense contract, an award that required a thorough security clearance and a federal-level due diligence process your team didn't even know was happening. Silence. Then the scraping of a chair leg as Franklin stood up slightly, only to sit right back down, as if realizing he no longer had the right leverage to leave without appearing weak. I continued slowly, methodically. You came here expecting me to surrender, to hand over a company you assumed was on the brink, a company you believed you could swallow whole with a polished press release and a few term sheets. But you never paused to ask what Signal Corps had become. I looked directly at Vivian. Her expression was unreadable now. Not cold, not confident, just calculating. I knew that look. I'd seen it in her eyes when she pitched to investors, when she prepared cross-examinations during her consulting work. It was the face of someone trying to regroup after stepping on a landmine. Vivian, I told you once, I said. Tone quieter now, just above a whisper that what you underestimate will eventually outgrow you. I gave you chances, years' worth. I supported you, built systems while you built speeches. And when you thought you were the sun, you asked me to be a star that only shone when you needed light. But I was building something in the dark, something you didn't even think to look for. Slide 5 illuminated the wall. It showed a simple graph, one line representing Strapman's current projected cybersecurity revenue curve. The other trendlies based on existing contracts and upcoming deals. The lines intersected in 7 months. Then Trendley's line soared past. Verified data. Conservative projections. One of the executives, a tall woman with silver earrings and a sharper mind than the others, finally spoke. These numbers are real. I nodded, verified by Renshaw and Banks. I'll provide the audit trail. We don't inflate, she turned to Vivian, then back to me. Why are you here then? Why show us this? Why not let us fall blind? Because I don't want Strapman to fall, I said. Honestly, I wanted to evolve, but not with the people who thought they could steal from me and mock me in public while doing it. Franklin leaned forward now, and I could tell he was still trying to reestablish dominance, still clinging to the belief that men like him didn't lose in rooms like this. Let's talk turkey, Quinn. Everything has a price. I raised an eyebrow. You mean like how my reputation had a price at your daughter's promotion party? Vivian flinched. No, I said flatly. This isn't about price. This is about positioning. I walked around the table slowly, not with arrogance, but with the deliberate calm of someone who already knew the outcome. I placed a folder in front of each person. 7 copies of an internal proposal drafted by my team and reviewed by Kira. The folder title read, Proposed Strategic Realignment of Strapman's Cybersecurity Assets. Trental Systems Partnership Agreement. Not a buyout, not a merger, a partnership with Trent holding 51% control of the cybersecurity division. I watched the expressions change as each person scanned the front page. The lawyer on Vivian's left blanched. The silver earring executive blinked, her jaw tightening in thought. Franklin scoffed under his breath. Vivian didn't react at all. She stared at me, but I saw her hand tighten around her pin. "You'll maintain face," I said, voice steady. "Strapment won't collapse. This deal keeps the lights on. You'll spin it as a strategic pivot. Trenley brings in the innovation. Strapman brings in the resources. Your shareholders won't panic." "And if we say no?" Franklin asked, his voice hollow with the exhaustion of someone who knew he had already lost. I clicked the final slide. It wasn't numbers. It was a curated list of emails. Excerpts from internal correspondence, where Vivian and Franklin joked about my intelligence, where they referred to Signal Corps as Quinn's hobby, and laughed about me being too naive to know I was being used. I hadn't hacked anything. These were forwarded to me by someone inside Strapment, someone who'd seen enough. "I don't want to release these," I said, "but I will. And once they're out, this board won't be deciding anything because you'll all be too busy dealing with a PR meltdown that paints Strapman as a firm that mocks founders while profiting from their innovations." The room stilled. Vivian spoke now softly, carefully. "You did all this behind my back." I met her gaze without flinching. "You did everything in front of mine." She looked down as if searching for something to say. Some last-minute salvage play, but no lifeline arrived. No one jumped to her defense. Franklin sank back in his chair, and the silver earring executive leaned forward. "Finally, I recommend we table this for internal review. But from where I'm sitting, the numbers don't lie. This deal isn't a loss, it's a parachute." Vivian opened her mouth, but no sound came. For the first time, she wasn't the loudest voice in the room. She wasn't even in control of her own board. I gathered my laptop, slid my own folder back into my case, and walked toward the door. "Press release goes live in 22 minutes, I said without looking back. "I'd have your PR team ready either way." Just before I stepped out, I heard the executive say, "Get legal on this now. If we can't beat him, we need to be on the right side of this." The doors closed behind me with a soft hiss. And just like that, the boardroom where they planned my funeral had become the venue of their quiet surrender. The sun was climbing higher by the time I returned to my own building. Not just a home office anymore, a proper headquarters. We'd signed the lease on the top floor of an old converted foundry. Brick walls and steel beams, still scarred with stories from a century ago. Now it held the heartbeat of Trenley. What once began in my garage had grown into something no one could ignore. Not even those who tried to erase me in a single night. As I stepped through the door, Kira was already there, seated in the war room with her tablet lit up and notes flying across the screen. She didn't greet me with a smile. She never did during moments like, because their options are partner with the company that's already eating their infrastructure or face breach of contract lawsuits, patent disputes, and federal inquiries they can't afford. She glanced at me. "They'll spin this as a smart alliance, but we both know what it really is. A rescue." "No," she said, setting the tablet down. "It's a hostile takeover disguised as mercy." I nodded slowly. That felt more accurate. 30 minutes later, we were joined by David, our systems architect, and June, our head of operations. Each of them knew what was at stake. Vivian and Strapman thought the press release was the final twist in this drama. But it wasn't the end. It was the doorway into the real power shift, one they hadn't even seen coming. Hero passed around folders, digital and physical. "We move now. This is the acquisition package for Strapman's cybersecurity portfolio. After last quarter's negligence, their patent lapse cost them major credibility. We've already secured 3 of the crown jewels, Pulse Protect, Phantom, and Echo Trace. David tapped his PIN. With those alone, we can replicate 80% of their in-house protection suite. But if we pull the trigger on the rest of the division, June finished the thought, we control the market narrative. And that's what this was about now, narrative. Because in business, power isn't just built on contracts and systems, it's built on story. And up until now, Strapman's story was that they were the aggressive elite firm, absorbing startups and stamping their logos over the brilliance of others. They were the ones who picked winners and erased origins. Vivian had spent her career making sure the spotlight only ever fell on her. But now, her story would change. She wouldn't be the woman who ascended. She'd be the woman who underestimated a man too quiet to clap back until it was too late. We finalized the offer packet. It was structured as a leveraged asset swap disguised under a licensing extension deal. Clean, surgical, no headlines needed. By the time the press would catch on, we'd own the skeleton of their cybersecurity arm, and Vivian would be giving interviews about strategic recalibration and lean innovation alignment to explain away the blood loss. By noon, we'd sent the paperwork. By 2:00 p.m., the reply came. It wasn't Franklin. It wasn't one of the board members. It was Vivian. Her email was brief, 3 sentences. Quinette, we acknowledge receipt of Trent's proposal. The board will accept the terms under the outline structure. There was no apology, no clever closing line, just surrender. I stared at the screen for a moment, not with satisfaction, but with something heavier. Not regret, but reflection. I remembered the first pitch deck Vivian ever helped me edit. We were still living in a shoebox apartment with cardboard for a coffee table. She had used highlighters on the margins, circled my clunky phrasing, added stars beside lines she liked. "You've got something here," she had said back then. "You just need someone who knows how to package it." But somewhere along the way, she stopped packaging me and started preparing to replace me. I forwarded the confirmation to Kira. She replied within 5 minutes with a signed digital receipt and a line that made me smile, even if only for a moment. "Welcome to your empire." The following morning, Trenley Systems quietly acquired Strapman Capital's cybersecurity division through an asset-based integration agreement that bypassed headlines and lawsuits. By the time the ink dried, their tech stack had been rebranded under our modular framework, and our licensing tags were embedded in over 60% of their proprietary systems. Vivian called me later that afternoon. I considered not answering, but I did. "Congratulations," she said. "You got what you wanted." I let the silence hang before responding. What I wanted was respect. And if you just waited. "No," I cut in. "You don't get to rewrite it now. You toasted me like a cautionary tale in front of your colleagues, your friends. My name was your punchline." "I miscalculated," she admitted, her voice stripped of its usual lacquer. "No," I said again. "You revealed who you really were." That wasn't miscalculation. That was clarity. She didn't reply right away. I could hear her breathing through the line like she wanted to scream but couldn't afford to. "I didn't think you had this in you," she said finally, quietly. "That's the problem," I said. "You never did." I ended the call, not because I hated her, but because I no longer needed her to understand me. The following week, Trenley's silent partnerships began surfacing through a cascade of favorable press leaks. Major outlets picked up the story. Startup secures defense and corporate wins while rival fumbles patents. Quiet tech powerhouse reshapes security sector. There were no quotes for me, just data. Quietly doing what I'd always done, letting the work speak louder than the noise. At a private industry event, I ran into one of Statman's junior partners. He clapped me on the shoulder, smiling like we were old friends. "She never saw it coming," he said with a chuckle. "Honestly, Quinn, we all thought you were just her plus one." I nodded. So did she. The man laughed, raised his drink, and wandered off. I didn't follow. I just stood there looking out over a sea of well-dressed executives, thinking about how close I'd come to fading into the background forever. But I didn't, because I stopped waiting to be seen. And instead, I built something they couldn't ignore. Vivian had the spotlight, but I had the stage. The first cracks showed the next day. Franklin appeared on a niche finance podcast doing his best impersonation of a man unfazed by a storm. "We've entered a transitional phase," he said, adjusting his cufflinks on camera. "It's all part of the strategic evolution at Strapman Capital. Our partnership with Trent Systems allows us to optimize our innovation landscape." He never mentioned me by name, not once. That would have been an acknowledgement of defeat. Instead, he called it a realignment, like it was his idea all along. The host nodded politely, probably pretending to understand a word of it, while Twitter lit up with side-by-side charts showing the truth. Strapman's cybersecurity branch had been absorbed, not partnered. It was a dismantling, masquerading his progress. And behind the scenes, their phones were on fire. By midday, Kira forwarded an email chain that had been anonymously leaked to us. Internal communications from Strapman's middle management VPs and department leads is suddenly unsure of their job security, wondering how long they had before Trentle started cutting. One thread from a project manager simply read, "I thought we were the predators." But the biggest surprise came from Vivian. She didn't show up to the Monday morning debrief her team had scheduled with ours. Instead, she sent a resignation letter, 3 lines long. No excuses, no pleas, just a formal stepping down, effective immediately, with a standard severance clause request that Kira immediately flagged as denied, pending internal ethics review. I read the letter 3 times. This wasn't Vivian's style. She wasn't a runner. She was a strategist, a chess player. If she was walking away from her crown jewel, it meant something deeper had broken. I didn't reply. That same afternoon, Franklin requested a one-on-one meeting. Kira and David offered to join, but I declined. This one I wanted to do alone. Not for ego, for clarity. We met at a neutral location, a corporate club where I once wasn't allowed past the reception desk without Vivian vouching for me. This time, the host greeted me by name. "Mr. Locke, right this way." Franklin was already seated in a private room with dark paneling and quiet lighting, sipping a scotch that looked untouched. His posture was still straight, still practiced, but his eyes had lost their spark. He nodded when I entered. Not out of respect, out of resignation. "Thanks for coming," he said. "I assume this isn't a social call." He smiled faintly. "It never isn't this business." I took my seat across from him, folded my hands on the table, said nothing. He cleared his throat. "You embarrassed us?" "No," I replied. "You embarrassed yourselves. I just stopped covering for it." He nodded slowly, acknowledging the hit. Vivian was wrong. About the toast about you. She let her pride get ahead of her judgment. I didn't see it at the time, but hey, stop, I said, holding up a hand. Don't rewrite history now. You saw it. You encouraged it. You clink-taped your glass. He didn't argue. Just looked down at his drink, swirling it once before setting it aside. "She's leaving the city," he said. "Moving to Chicago. Her brother's firm made an offer. Different sector. She's going to pivot away from tech." It hit me in a way I didn't expect. Not pain, not satisfaction, just finality. She was running because the room she once controlled no longer answered to her, because her last move in a game she thought she'd won ended with her queen off the board. "She'll be fine," he added. "I'm sure she will," I said. "She always lands on her feet." He leaned forward now, his voice lower, more deliberate. "I came here to ask you something, not as an opponent, as a father." I tilted my head. "Careful. That's a role you've never played with me." He didn't flinch. "Let her leave with dignity. Don't release the emails." I studied him for a moment. This was the same man who once told Vivian to aim higher when I brought her flowers for finishing her first client pitch. The same man who introduced me as the Wi-Fi guy at a holiday party full of investors. And now he sat across from me, asking for something he never offered me. "Mercy, they're already archived," I said. "Not released? I don't need them anymore." His eyes flicked up, surprised. "Why?" "Because I've already won," I said. "And I'm not interested in scorched earth. I'm interested in building something that lasts." He leaned back slowly. For the first time, I saw respect, not affection, not warmth, but something close to acknowledgement. "You're not the man I thought you were." "No," I said, standing. "I'm better." I left him there with his untouched scotch and an ego too bruised to salvage. Outside, the winter wind cut across my face, sharp but invigorating. I didn't feel heavy anymore. The weight of their doubt, their ridicule, the nights spent wondering if love could survive dismissal, all of it was gone. Back at Trent, our team was already preparing for the next chapter. We had more contracts lined up, more hires planned. The silence from Strapment meant they were bleeding, but they weren't stupid. They wouldn't challenge us again. The market had shifted. We weren't the garage experiment anymore. 2 weeks passed before I saw Vivian again. It wasn't in a boardroom or across a courtroom. It was in the most unexpected place, the airport. I was waiting in line at a coffee kiosk in Terminal C, heading to a leadership summit in D.C. to speak on a panel about innovation under adversity. She stood 2 spots ahead of me, her hair shorter now, wearing a simple blazer and flats. She looked smaller somehow, not in stature, but in energy. She turned and saw me, her mouth opened slightly, then closed. I gave her a nod. Nothing more. She stepped aside and waited until I had my drink. "I heard you're speaking at the summit," she said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. "I am. You'll do well. Thank you." There was a pause. "I was wrong about you," she said. "You were wrong to me." I corrected gently. "There's a difference." She nodded. "I've started therapy." I didn't respond. She added, "I'm sorry. Not for losing, for what I did to you, how I made you feel." It was the first real apology she'd ever given me. I sipped my coffee. "I hope Chicago treats you well." She smiled faintly. "Take care, Quinn." And just like that, she walked away. No breakdown, no grand scene. Just a woman who lost the spotlight and finally saw what had been in the shadows all along. Back at the summit, I stood in front of a room filled with executives, founders, analysts. They expected case studies, graphs, numbers. But I started with a single sentence. "My name is Quinn Locke, and the only thing more powerful than being underestimated is knowing exactly when to stop asking for permission." The room was silent. Then it erupted in applause. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't revenge. It was rebirth. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived. Heavy cream cardstock with an embossed Navy crest and my name. Not just printed, but written by hand in careful calligraphy. Mr. Quinlock. There was no return address on the front, but I already knew where it came from. Strapman Capital. The company that once tried to bury me with a smile now wanted me to stand at their podium. Inside the envelope was a formal invitation. You are cordially invited to speak at the Strapman Capital Leadership Summit on recognizing overlooked innovation. I reread the line twice, letting the irony settle in. Strapment. The firm that mocked my work, tried to consume it, then surrendered to it, now wanted me to serve as a symbol of innovation they'd championed. No acknowledgement of the war we'd fought. No mention of Vivian, just a carefully designed rebranding of reality. Kira laughed when I showed it to her. They really think this makes them look progressive, she said, like they weren't on the wrong side of the story a month ago. They want a redemption arc, I said, and they think I'll write it for them. She leaned forward. Are you going? Absolutely. She blinked. Seriously? I nodded. Not for them. For the ones watching who've been underestimated. For the founders, no one clapped for the men and women who were told they were wasting time chasing something no one else understood. She grinned. Then, let's write a new kind of keynote. The summit was held at the Helix Grand Hotel, the same venue where Strapman used to throw its summer gall. I remember being there once years ago, standing awkwardly in a rented suit while Vivian introduced me to colleagues with lines like, "He's working on something in tech, very underground." This time, I entered through the speaker's entrance. No name tag, no wait. My assistant had sent my bio ahead along with my media kit. I was ushered to the green room where soft leather chairs and bottled water awaited. A far cry from the folding chair by the bar they'd offered me before. The room filled quickly with executives and analysts. The air buzzed with chatter, but not the performative kind. I remembered this wasn't a celebration. It was a showcase, a chance to identify power before it passed them by, and I was no longer invisible. I caught sight of Vivian before I stepped on stage. She sat in the 5th row, center aisle, wearing a navy dress and no jewelry, her hair pulled back. No entourage, no notes, just her and a quiet expression I couldn't read. She wasn't speaking today. That much I already knew. Her role in the company had been reduced to a consultant title with no direct reports. Franklin had retired last week to focus on wellness, they said. But everyone knew he'd been nudged out. My name was announced. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was measured. Curious, like the audience was trying to decide what kind of man I would be once I stood under the lights. I stepped onto the stage. No notes in hand, no teleprompter, just me. And every word I'd waited years to say. "Good morning," I began. "My name is Quinlock, and I used to be a silent partner in every room I entered. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I was surrounded by people who were too busy talking to listen." A few chuckles, mostly stillness. For years, I built systems in the dark. I watched others get credit for the structure I designed. I watched opportunities pass because I didn't wear the right suit, didn't attend the right school, didn't stand next to the right last name. I was labeled a dropout, a placeholder, a man with more ideas than sense. I was locked in now, even Vivian's. But here's what I learned. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Silence doesn't mean consent. And being overlooked isn't the same as being wrong. I paced slowly across the stage. They called my company a hobby, an experiment, something to be folded into a larger, more serious brand. And when I refused to play along, they laughed publicly, proudly. A few heads in the crowd turned toward Vivian. She didn't move. They thought that moment broke me. What they didn't know was that I had already built something stronger than any applause they could offer. A foundation they were already standing on. Now, The tension was palpable. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't bitter. I was stating facts, and those facts held power. Signal Corps and now Trentel Systems operates behind some of the largest infrastructures in the world. We're the backbone no one noticed until the building started to sway. And today, I'm here not to celebrate being noticed, but to remind you all of something vital. I paused, letting the words breathe. Innovation doesn't always look like a pitch deck or sound like a standing ovation. Sometimes it looks like failure. Sometimes it sounds like silence. But if you're building something real, something lasting, it won't need validation. It will validate itself. I stepped back to center stage. So to those watching, those who've ever been dismissed or talked over or underestimated, I want you to hear me clearly. You don't need a spotlight to matter. You don't need applause to be undeniable. You just need to keep building quietly, persistently, relentlessly, because eventually the world catches up. I didn't wait for applause. I left the stage just as calmly as I arrived, walking down the steps, past rows of still faces. It wasn't until I reached the end of the aisle that the clapping began. Slow, hesitant, then building into something real. But I didn't turn back. Outside the ballroom, I stepped into the hallway, heart pounding in a way that wasn't anxiety, but adrenaline. The kind of rush that comes not from proving people wrong, but from finally proving yourself right. Vivian followed a few moments later. She didn't speak immediately, just stood beside me, staring at the wall like it had something more interesting to say. "That was powerful," she said. "Wasn't meant to be," I replied. "It was meant to be true," she nodded. "I deserve that." I shrugged. "You earned it." A pause hung between us. She turned to me, eyes softer than I remembered. "You really built something, Quinn." "No," I said. "I became something." And for the first time, she didn't correct me. Later that night, back in my office, I watched the video of the speech being shared across social media. Thousands of views, dozens of captions quoting lines I hadn't planned, but spoke anyway. One stood out. It read, "He didn't raise his voice. He raised the standard." Vivian's firm had invited me to be a symbol. Instead, I became a mirror. And what they saw staring back was the man they tried to erase. Still standing, still building, and no longer in anyone's shadow. It didn't happen overnight. It never does. No matter how loud the headlines or how sharp the fall of those who once laughed. True victory is quieter than people expect. It's not confetti or fireworks. It's steadiness. It's walking into rooms that once dismissed you and watching the people who built walls pretend they were doors all along. It's hearing your name spoken with a new weight and knowing you didn't beg for it. You earned it. 1 year after the summit, Trent Systems went public. The IPO exceeded expectations by every metric that mattered. Triple valuation, oversubscribed in under 4 hours. Wall Street Journal called us the ghost architect of cybersecurity. A headline that would have embarrassed me 5 years ago, but now felt accurate in the most poetic sense. We had never chased hype. We built beneath it. Beneath the noise, beneath the arrogance, beneath the Vivian Hawks of the world who thought quiet men are relevant. I didn't make a speech on IPO day. I didn't ring the bell. I let June handle that. Our COO, whose fingerprints were all over the operational miracle we become. She stood on the balcony in a simple black suit, smiled for the cameras and said, "We're just getting started." And she meant it. Trent wasn't about one man anymore. It was a machine powered by people who had once been overlooked, now leading departments that rewrote industry benchmarks. Vivian, she kept her promise and moved to Chicago. She joined a real estate tech firm. Something softer, safer, a quieter stage. Occasionally, Her name popped up in digital features about pivoting and leadership. And once I even saw her listed as a guest panelist at a small entrepreneurship forum. I didn't watch the video, but someone on my team told me she spoke with more humility than they remembered. Maybe that was growth. Maybe it was just bruising from a fall she hadn't seen coming. Either way, I no longer kept tabs. I didn't need to. She was in the rear view now, blurry and distant. Franklin retired completely. No podcasts, no op-eds, just vanished into whatever gated community would have him. I imagined he still swirled whiskey and told stories that conveniently left my name out. That was fine. I didn't need space in his version of events. I had already reclaimed my own. The house Vivian and I once shared sold to a young couple expecting twins. I left behind a few things. The desk where a signal core began. The vintage router I soldered by hand. The coffee mug with the faded print that read, "Code like nobody's watching." Artifacts of a man who had been willing to be unseen for too long. I bought a loft overlooking the harbor. Minimalist, quiet, peaceful in a way success doesn't usually allow. But I'd earned the right to make noise when I wanted, and to choose silence when I didn't. I spent my mornings walking to the office, rain or shine. No drivers, no entourage, just earbuds and black coffee. Thinking about architecture, not just code, but human architecture. The people who stayed, the ones who left. The fragile scaffolding of trust, loyalty, vision. Every founder thinks they'll be judged by what they build. They forget they're just as much judged by who they let build it with them. I brought on 2 interns that year, both from non-traditional backgrounds. One had dropped out of college after her scholarship was pulled. The other used to work construction by day and learned Python by night on borrowed Wi-Fi. I gave them full-time contracts before the year was out. Because talent isn't always loud. Sometimes it waits, sometimes it whispers, and I had learned to listen for whispers. At a leadership dinner one fall evening, an older executive leaned across the table and said, "Quinn, you could write a book, make millions more telling your story." I smiled politely. I'd rather live a better one. He laughed, thinking it was modesty. But I meant every word. See, the victory wasn't the money. It wasn't even the recognition. It was the peace, the kind that sits on your shoulders like sunlight after years of rain. The kind that no headline, no IPO, no applause can deliver. It's when your worth no longer requires explanation, when your story is no longer edited by other people's insecurities. I got a letter around Christmas, handwritten. The return address said Chicago. It was from Vivian. No envelope perfume, no signature flourish, just plain paper and ink. "Quinn, I won't take up much space. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what you were building. Not just the code, but the way you held yourself, the patience, the vision. You were never invisible. I just didn't know how to see. I hope this chapter of your life is kinder than the ones I helped write." V? I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer I rarely opened. I didn't need the closure, but I appreciated the honesty. Maybe people don't change completely, but some learn how to carry their damage without cutting others with it. That was enough. One night in late spring, I stood by the office window while the city hummed below. Hira came in with a bottle of wine and a tired smile. "You know," she said, handing me a glass. "A year ago today, we were just hoping Strapman wouldn't sue us into oblivion. And now?" I asked. "Now they forward our white papers to clients like they wrote them." We clinked glasses as we sipped. She added, "You ever think about what would have happened if you'd signed that deal? Let them fold Signal Corps and like they planned?" I nodded sometimes, and I wouldn't have been me anymore. That was the truth of it. Signing that deal wouldn't have just cost me my company. It would have erased the part of me that believed in slow building things and letting work speak when words failed, and not needing the room to clap as long as the structure held. That was the core of who I was. And I'd rather be the quiet man behind a fortress than the loud one standing on a stage built by someone else. Eventually, the lights dimmed. The guests left. The cameras moved on to the next founder to watch. But Trental stayed. Signal Corpor stayed. I stayed. And every time I heard someone refer to me as just a dropout or Vivian Hawks, I smiled because I knew something they didn't. They were still using my systems, still logging into networks I built, still protected by code I wrote in a garage while they drank champagne and laughed. And that was enough. I didn't just win.